Every night she stayed alone in the office, secretly copying thousands of pages. If caught, she'd go to prison. But this secretary was exposing the biggest lies about the Vietnam War, and the FBI finding her was only a matter of time. Welcome to Classified Hidden Histories, where we uncover the secrets they never wanted you to know. I'm your host, and today we're diving into the story of Patricia Marx, the woman whose courage helped end a war and whose name you've probably never heard. September 1969. Patricia Marx sat at her desk at the Rand Corporation in Santa Monica, California, typing correspondence and filing documents like she did every day. At 29 years old, Patricia had worked as a secretary for nearly a decade. It was steady work, decent pay, and she was good at it. RAND Corporation was a prestigious think tank that conducted research for the U.S. government, particularly the Department of Defense. Patricia's job was to support the analysts who wrote reports on everything from nuclear strategy to counterinsurgency tactics. She had security clearance, access to classified documents, and a reputation for being reliable and discreet. Her boss was Dr. Daniel Ellsberg, a brilliant defense analyst who had worked at the Pentagon and spent time in Vietnam as a State Department official. Ellsberg was intense, driven, and increasingly troubled by something Patricia didn't yet understand. She'd noticed him working late into the night, poring over thick volumes of classified documents, his face growing darker with each passing week. One evening in early October, Patricia was preparing to leave when Ellsberg called her into his office. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, his desk covered with papers marked top secret. He asked her to sit down, then closed the door behind her. What Ellsberg told Patricia over the next hour changed her life forever. He explained that he'd been reading a classified study commissioned by Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, a comprehensive history of U.S. involvement in Vietnam from 1945 to 1968. The study, which came to be known as the Pentagon Papers, revealed that 4 presidential administrations had systematically lied to the American public about the war. The documents showed that presidents knew the war was unwinnable but continued sending soldiers to die anyway. They revealed that the Gulf of Tonkin incident, the supposed attack that justified massive escalation, was at least partially fabricated. They documented decades of deception, manipulation, and betrayal of the American people's trust. Ellsberg told Patricia he couldn't keep this secret anymore. Over 40,000 American soldiers had already died in Vietnam, and the death toll was rising every day based on policies the government knew were doomed to fail. He was going to copy the entire 7,000-page study and give it to the press. And he needed her help. Patricia left Ellsberg's office in a daze, her mind reeling from what she'd just heard. She walked to her car in the parking garage, sat behind the wheel, and didn't start the engine. Her hands were shaking. Everything Ellsberg had told her made a terrible kind of sense. Patricia's younger brother was in the army, currently stationed in Germany but potentially facing deployment to Vietnam. The thought that he might be sent to die in a war that officials knew was unwinnable made her feel physically sick. But what Ellsberg was proposing was insane. Copying thousands of pages of top-secret documents and giving them to the press wasn't whistleblowing. It was espionage. They could both go to prison for decades. Patricia had no desire to be a martyr or a hero. She just wanted to do her job, support her family, live a normal life. She drove home to her small apartment in Venice Beach, made herself dinner that she couldn't eat, and tried to watch television without absorbing anything on the screen. Her mind kept returning to Ellsberg's words. 40,000 dead and counting, all based on lies. Patricia didn't sleep that night. She lay in her bed staring at the ceiling, weighing her options. She could refuse to help Ellsberg and keep her job, her security clearance, her safe, comfortable life, or she could risk everything to expose truths that the American people deserved to know. By morning, Patricia had made her decision. She called Ellsberg and told him she would help. Her voice was steady, but inside she felt terrified. She had no idea what she was getting herself into, but she knew she couldn't stay silent while soldiers continued dying for a lie. The copying operation began cautiously. Ellsberg couldn't simply carry boxes of classified documents out of the RAND building. Security was too tight, and the documents were too closely monitored. Instead, he would check out volumes of the Pentagon Papers for legitimate research purposes. Then Patricia would help him copy them after hours. They quickly discovered a problem. The RAND building's photocopier was monitored and required authorization codes for use. Every copy made was logged and could be traced back to specific employees. Using the office copier would leave a paper trail leading directly to them. Ellsberg found a solution through a friend named Anthony Russo, who had access to an advertising agency with a high-capacity photocopier. They would sneak documents out of RAND, copy them at the ad agency at night, and return them the next morning before anyone noticed they were missing. The logistics were complex and terrifying. Ellsberg would check out documents claiming he needed them for a research paper. Patricia would place them in her large purse when leaving the office, trying to look casual despite her pounding heart. They'd drive to the advertising agency after business hours, let themselves in with Russo's key, and spend hours feeding pages through the photocopier. The first night they copied documents, Patricia's hands shook so badly she could barely operate the machine. Every sound in the building made her jump. Every car passing on the street below sent her heart racing. She kept imagining FBI agents bursting through the door, handcuffs ready. But nothing happened. They copied several hundred pages, carefully organized them, and Patricia returned the originals to her purse. The next morning, she arrived at RAND early and filed the documents back in their proper places. No one noticed anything unusual. Over the following weeks, the copying operation became routine, but Patricia's fear never diminished. Every night spent at the advertising agency felt like walking a tightrope over an abyss. The three of them, Ellsberg, Patricia, and Russo, would work in near silence. The only sounds the mechanical whir of the photocopier and the rustle of paper. They developed procedures to minimize risk. Patricia would carry documents out in her purse in small batches, never more than a few hundred pages at a time. They varied their schedule, sometimes copying on weeknights, sometimes on weekends. They told no one what they were doing, not family, not friends, no one. The psychological toll was enormous. Patricia started having nightmares about being arrested. She'd wake up in cold sweats, her heart pounding, imagining FBI agents searching her apartment. During the day, she found it increasingly difficult to maintain her normal demeanor at work. Every time her phone rang, she was sure it was security calling to question her about missing documents. The strain showed in other ways, too. Patricia lost weight from stress-induced loss of appetite. She stopped making plans with friends, afraid that any change in her routine might draw attention. She became hypervigilant about security procedures at RAND, terrified that enhanced monitoring might catch them in the act. Ellsberg wasn't handling the pressure much better. He grew increasingly paranoid, convinced that government surveillance was tracking their activities. He started varying his routes to work, checking his car for tracking devices, using payphones instead of his home line. His marriage was falling apart under the strain of his secret project. By early 1970, they'd copied nearly all 7,000 pages of the Pentagon Papers. Patricia had spent over 100 nights at the advertising agency, risking her freedom with every copied page. But now they faced their biggest challenge: what to do with the documents Ellsberg initially tried to get the Pentagon Papers released through official channels. He gave copies to senators he thought might be sympathetic, hoping Congress would hold hearings or release the documents publicly. But every senator he approached declined to help. They didn't want to be seen as unpatriotic or soft on communism by revealing classified information, even if that information exposed government lies. Frustrated by congressional cowardice, Ellsberg decided to go directly to the press. In March 1971, he contacted Neil Sheehan, a reporter for the New York Times who had covered Vietnam and might understand the document's significance. After careful vetting, Ellsberg gave Sheehan access to the Pentagon Papers. Patricia watched all of this from the sidelines, her role in copying the documents still secret. She continued working at RAND, maintaining her cover, terrified that any day someone would discover what she'd done. The waiting was almost worse than the copying had been. At least during the operation, she'd been taking action. Now she could only wait and wonder if their sacrifice would mean anything. On June 13, 1971, the New York Times began publishing excerpts from the Pentagon Papers. The first article revealed that the Johnson administration had systematically lied to Congress and the public about the scope and nature of U.S. involvement in Vietnam. The revelations were explosive, dominating headlines and television news. Patricia read the Times article at her desk at RAND, her coffee growing cold as she absorbed the impact of what they'd accomplished. The secrets she'd risked everything to expose were finally public. But her relief was short-lived. 2 days later, the Nixon administration obtained a court order blocking the Times from publishing further articles claiming national security concerns. It was the first time in American history that the federal government had imposed prior restraint on a major newspaper. The Pentagon Papers case was heading to the Supreme Court. As the legal battle over publication unfolded, the FBI launched a massive investigation to find the source of the leak. It didn't take them long to focus on Daniel Ellsberg. His access to the documents, his anti-war activism, and his contacts with journalists all pointed to him as the prime suspect. On June 28, 1971, Ellsberg held a press conference and publicly admitted he had leaked the Pentagon Papers. He was immediately indicted on charges of espionage, theft, and conspiracy. He faced up to 115 years in prison. Patricia watched Ellsberg's confession on television, her stomach churning. She waited for him to mention her role, to reveal that he hadn't acted alone. But Ellsberg said nothing about his accomplices. He was taking the fall by himself, protecting Patricia and Russo from prosecution. For weeks, Patricia lived in terror that the FBI would discover her involvement. Every knock on her door sent her heart racing. Every car that followed her for more than a block seemed like surveillance. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything except the possibility of arrest. But the FBI never came for her. Ellsberg continued to protect his accomplices throughout his trial, refusing to identify anyone who had helped him. The government couldn't prove that others were involved, and eventually they stopped looking. In May 1973, the charges against Ellsberg were dismissed due to government misconduct in the case, including illegal wiretapping and a break-in at his psychiatrist's office by White House operatives. The dismissal was partly due to the same kind of government overreach and abuse of power that the Pentagon Papers had exposed. Patricia Marx's role in exposing the Pentagon Papers remained secret for decades, while Daniel Ellsberg became famous as the most dangerous man in America. Patricia returned to her quiet life, her courage known only to a handful of people. She never sought recognition for what she'd done. She didn't write memoirs or give interviews or appear on television. She simply went back to work, continued her career, and lived with the knowledge that she'd done the right thing at tremendous personal risk. The Pentagon Papers fundamentally changed how Americans viewed their government. The documents proved that officials had lied about Vietnam for decades, eroding public trust in government institutions in ways that persist today. The Supreme Court's decision allowing publication became a landmark victory for press freedom, establishing that the government cannot censor the press simply by claiming national security concerns. But the paper's most immediate impact was on the war itself. The revelations accelerated public opposition to Vietnam, making it politically impossible for Nixon to continue Johnson's policies. American involvement in the war effectively ended within 2 years of publication, potentially saving thousands of lives. Patricia's contribution to this historic moment was as essential as Ellsberg's, yet her name appears in no history books. She took the same risks, spent countless nights in fear, and faced the same potential punishment. The difference is that she did it all in silence, without recognition or acclaim. Her story reminds us that history's heroes aren't always the people whose names we remember. Sometimes they're the secretaries, assistants, and support staff who enable others to act courageously. Sometimes they're ordinary people who make extraordinary choices in moments of moral crisis. The next time you hear about government whistleblowers or leaked classified documents, remember Patricia Marx. Remember that behind every public act of courage there are often invisible accomplices who risked just as much but chose to remain in the shadows. This is Classified, Hidden Histories, where we uncover the secrets they never wanted you to know. Because understanding who really makes history helps us appreciate the courage that exists in unexpected places. Patricia Marx's story, like so many others, was hidden for decades because she chose anonymity over fame. But her contribution to ending an unjust war and exposing government lies was no less significant than that of the people whose names became household words. In the end, Patricia's story is about the price of conscience and the courage required to act on moral convictions even when no one will ever know what you've done. She risked everything to expose the truth, not for glory or recognition, but because she couldn't remain silent while soldiers died for lies.